So what's the function of your skin, right? It has many functions, actually, not just to cover your body, right, and keep your organs in and make you look pretty. It's very important in controlling our body temperature, right? We talked about this with swelling, right? How that increase of the blood flow to that area makes you hot. Well, it's because your blood is hot, right? Your blood absorbs most of the heat of your metabolism, so that heat is going to go somewhere. And one of the ways your body can regulate and get rid of excess heat is send that blood to your skin, this very large surface area, and then with the aid of sweating, right, that convection that happens, we can cool the body off. Your skin, of course, helps prevent loss of fluid from body tissues. It synthesizes vitamin D for normal development of bones and teeth. Rickets is a deficiency in vitamin D, and apparently is becoming more and more common because many of us young children don't walk to school anymore, right? Our parents drive us and drop them off. And some kids aren't getting enough outside time, being exposed to enough sunlight to help synthesize the vitamin D necessary for growing bones. So definitely something to think about. Nowadays, too, we supplement vitamin D, though, in a lot of our foods and even drinks. They add vitamin D to milk, even to juices like orange juice. So we have numerous sensory receptors in our skin too, right? It helps us sense our environment. We know if something's hot and cold. We feel pain. We produce cytokines that aid in the development and function of immunity, right? So remember, cytokines are the chemical messages, but basically the hormones of our immune system. And we have large collections of white blood cells, because remember, this is a barrier, this is our wall, and if it is breached, if it is wounded, we want to have a response team on site. So in addition to the macrophages and dendritic cells that are scattered throughout our skin, we even have areas and collections of tissue that we refer to as SALT for skin-associated lymphoid tissue. Remember, our lymphocytes are who? Who are our lymphocytes? What cells are lymphocytes? Yeah, but more specific. B cells and T cells, right? So you've got B cells and T cells right on site. And remember, B cells are important because what do they make and secrete? Antibodies. What do we call a B cell when it's secreting antibodies? A plasma cell. This stuff doesn't go away, guys. Comprehensive final exam. I know you just love us for that. But you will love me when you go back to nursing school, right? Because you will know this stuff. And everyone else will want to study with you. So your skin, right, multifunctionality, right, very important, probably the largest, most important organ in your body. So you also have some glands in your skin, right, that help you when you're healthy, but can be an area that can become diseased. So your sebaceous glands, which are associated with your hair follicles, produce an oily substance known as sebum. This can be a source of nutrients for microbial growth. Byproducts, fatty acids that are produced by our normal flora that eat this are toxic to pathogenic microbes. So this is where our normal flora that usually inhabit our skin in the sebaceous glands usually help protect us. The sweat glands are salty, and this salt usually inhibits microbial growth. It's not often that a sweat gland gets infected. More than often, right, you have actually microorganisms in your sebaceous glands. It's only when you have conditions where you produce too much sebum, right, or other issues that you get an overgrowth sometimes of the bacteria. It can cause infections like zits, pimples, right, those types of things. Your best course of action is not to pop the zit, although most of us can't resist. Put a little bit of triple antibiotic ointment on it, right, because it is a bacterial infection, right, and so antibiotics can help with that infection. If you squeeze it, you're just causing more tissue damage and the potential of it spreading within the skin and to other areas on the top of the skin. So our normal skin microbiota help us out, right? Because they're there, they take up the spots. The bad bacteria can't take up residency. They have nothing to eat. There are 3 general groups of microorganisms that inhabit our skin. And most of the time, right, when we're in balance, it's a good relationship. It's a symbiotic relationship. So most of the time it's a good symbiotic relationship. But there are some times where an opportunity can arise when there's a break in the skin, where organisms can go further into the skin or the tissue, right? They take advantage of the opportunity to basically get to the buffet instead of just eating the scraps we give them. So the most common categories are what we call diphthroids, Staphylococci, and some yeast, which of course are fungi, right? They're eukaryotic in nature. So diphthroids are named after the fact that they resemble, they're gram-positive rods that resemble a pathogenic Clostridium, where is it? There it is. Corynebacterium diphtheria. So they resemble it, right? But they are not it. Diphtheria, the kind that causes disease, actually produces a toxin, the diphtheria toxin. So these guys resemble in that they're gram-positive rods. But they also can have varied shape. But they're lowly virulent, right? Which means that they don't produce toxins. They're not bad guys. Virulence means what tricks do they have up their sleeve basically to avoid our immune system, right? Or to survive in the presence of it. These guys are the ones that contribute to what we refer to as body odor. When they break down our byproducts, when they break down sweat, the byproducts they produce the odor that is offensive to us. Propionibacterium arcanus, as you can imagine, falls into this category too. And again, it can, for some individuals, cause acne, right? Severe infections of the hair follicles of the skin. The other group that most of us are quite aware of are Staphylococci. And in fact, Staphylococcus epididymis is named after the fact that it typically is part of the normal flora that live on our skin. These guys are gram-positive, right? Cocci in clusters. They're salt tolerant. Again, they would have to be, considering the environment they live in. They usually don't cause problems, right? But people who have compromised immune system, these organisms can cause some pretty serious problems. By being there, remember, they take up the parking spots, the food supply, and keep other microorganisms from establishing residency. Helps us maintain balance. Fungi, mainly yeast, that can infect the skin. They're lipophilic. What is lipo? Fatty, right? And philic means loving, right? And again, that sebum, right? Our skin produces a very nice, rich, fatty, oily substance, right? Great food supply for them. Most of us, all of us, right, from early childhood, from late childhood throughout life, have normal yeasts that are associated with our system. Thought I turned that off. But again, under certain conditions, they can overgrow and cause what we refer to as infection. So one particular infection caused by Melissizza furzer, right? So this is a yeast, is the main contributor to a lot of rashes or dandruff that people experience, as well as Tetania versicolor. Tetania refers to a worm, because at one time they thought it was a worm, right? It was worm infections. And probably because, again, yeast can spread out sometimes and look like fungi too. So as you can see, these long purple threads in a skin scraping from an individual with this infection. So for this particular yeast, it can cause this condition referred to as versicolor. So people who have light pigmentation to their skin, it tends to cause irregular discolorization, somewhat pigmentation to the skin. So opposite in color. So people who are dark complected tend to have loss of pigmentation in the area where the infection is, right? So again, this opposite color of effect, right? So there are 5 bacterial skin diseases that I want you guys to know their causative agents. So typical hair follicle infections, most commonly a pathogenic strain of Staphylococcus aureus. So we're not talking about Staph epi, we're talking about Staph aureus. Scalded skin syndrome is caused by a particular strain of pathogenic Staphylococcus aureus, a strain that produces a toxin. Does anybody find out which toxin that is? Well, it separates your skin from your body, right? This toxin. So it's exfoliant toxin. So most women, right, know about exfoliants, right? So this is easy to remember, right? But you know, there are things, abrasive things that we use to remove the dead cells from our skin, from the outer layer of our skin. This toxin removes the actual living layer of skin, unfortunately, right? So there used to be a horrific picture in your guys' book. I think they took it out. It was of this baby with this infection. And, I mean, literally the skin just coming off and the infant was just red from head to toe.
Is this a disease that they nickname like butterfly disease? Where it's like the skin's like so fragile that it just is constantly...
I personally have never heard it called the butterfly disease, but it could potentially be it, but I don't know.
I mean, ESPN did like a short on like one kid who did like a
Make-A-Wish.
thing, but
Yeah. Well, the good news thing with this is that it is a bacterial infection, so it could be cured with antibiotics.
I think it was like a condition.
Yeah. So I'm thinking
It's
probably.
constantly being ripped off, so like every 3 hours just re-bandaged and all that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, I'm thinking that's some other type of condition. You know, because again, this is a bacterial infection, so this is treatable. This is treatable. Streptococcal and impegato. I always stumble on that one. Most commonly caused by Streptococcus prurigens, but it can be sometimes caused by certain pathogenic strains of Staphylococcus aureus. Streptococcus prurigens in our throat causes strep throat. That's the cause of major strep throat. Can also infect the skin and cause a really nasty infection of the skin. Rocky Mountain spotted fever is caused by Rickettsia rickettsii. in Lyme disease is caused by Borrelia burgdorferi. So again, these are all bacterial infections, right, of the skin. And some of the most common that you will see. So Staphylococcus aureus can cause lots of infections, right? So it can cause, skin infections, infections of the follicle, more severe infections of the skin. It can infect the inner lining of the heart. It can cause food poisoning, right? When ingested with your food, some of them, the toxins they produce can cause food poisoning. Again, more serious tissue and skin infections can infect the bone. If it produces that particular toxin, right, and cause the skin to literally peel off, causing the syndrome we know as scaled skin syndrome, because again, at one time they didn't know what caused it. Toxic shock syndrome, some of them can produce toxins that cause you to go into shock. And then again, they could be associated with wound infections. So this is the scary list of possibilities for Staphylococcus aureus pathogenic strains. So the most common ones that pretty much all staphylococci have, and which is why they're are pathogenic, is the first two that are actual factors. So that are distinct to Staphylococcus aureus. There are a lot of pathogenic organisms that have a capsule, right? And having a capsule helps them prevent phagocytosis, right? Or hide from phagocytosis. The problem with Staphylococcus aureus is these two factors. Most, if not all, strains have these two virulence factors: clumping factor and collagenase. Clumping factor allows them to attach to fibrin, fibronectin, and plastic devices, right? So this is one of those ones that really creates problems with implants. And when it gets into our tissue, right, it can attach to these components of our tissue, the fibrin and the fibrogen. So that's bad news, right? They can really stick to us and things really well. The next one, collagenase, impedes the process of our white blood cells of getting into the area, because what this does is actually activate our inactivated clotting proteins in our blood. So those and in our tissue too, right? Because during inflammation, some of that will leak into the tissue. So these proteins are there. We're not activating them. They're our own proteins, right, for clotting up when blood vessels are damaged. But this organism produces collagenase, and this will cause our clotting proteins to clot without us activating it. So they can kind of clog up our capillaries on their own, and this stops the white blood cells from getting to the area, right, because they're going to travel through the blood vessel. So the blood vessel's intact. We didn't turn on this system. They turned it on. So one of the tests that sometimes are done in certain microbiology labs is we'll actually take patient or people plasma, which is the liquid phase of your blood, taken with anticoagulants, right, which stops the clotting cascade from happening. Because outside the body, those will also become activated, right? When you take blood outside the body, it coagulates. I guess, I don't know exactly how, but something, right? It knows it's not in the body anymore, and it activates that clotting cascade, right? And so the blood clumps up. For this organism, if you put it into plasma, you incubate it in plasma, again, it's going to release this substance, and it causes the plasma to coagulate. So in the little tube, it'll become a clot, right? You can flip the tube up, and it's solid. It's no longer liquid. So this is a common test. It's called the coagulase test, right? and it's used a lot for differentiating Staphylococcus epidermis from Staph aureus. In the microbiology lab, for our students that get the unknown of Staph aureus versus Staph epi, we do the mannitol salt agar plates instead of messing with plasma. And in that case, Staphylococcus aureus ferments mannitol and produces acid, and we can see that yellow discolorization to the plate. Whereas Staphylococcus epidermis doesn't have that ability either. So the rest of this list, right, it really depends on the strain of the Staphylococci as to what other tricks it has up its sleeve. So if it's causing scald-scale syndrome, it has that exfoliant toxin, right? And it unfortunately separates the layers of the skin right off the body. But as you can see, looking through this list, this is a pretty mean bacteria, right? Not something you want to mess around with. But those are the two main important ones as it relates to Staph aureus. So I wanted to think, I'll make sure we answered all the questions. So other diseases, right, have a general idea about them. The two main characteristics that lead to its virulence, so that's clumping factor and collagenase. What's the main reservoir? Anyone know where typically Staph aureus comes from? Most of us at one time or another carry it in our noses. Right? So when people are sneezing, right, they could be very easily passing this on. Why are they difficult to treat? Anyone know why they're sometimes difficult to treat? What's MRSA? Methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. The problem is we have antibiotic-resistant strains out there. We've got MRSA, right? Because the most common antibiotic that was prescribed was a penicillin-like drug, methicillin, to combat staph infections, right? Now we have VRSA. Anyone know what the V stands for? Vancomycin was the next drug that was widely used, right? I'm pretty sure the list will continue to get longer, right? It's the nature of the beast. So, as I said, most of us carry it in our noses. About 20% of healthy individuals carry it continuously, right? So you're a carrier, right? It doesn't cause infection in your nose, right? But you could infect your own self, sneezing on your own wounds, right? Breathing on your own wounds. In the microbiology lab, another characteristic of Staph aureus is that it's beta hemolytic, which means it completely lyses red blood cells. And I always tell students when they're doing their plated cultures to cover up their plate with the lid, right? That's proper aseptic technique so that you're not breathing on your culture, right? Because then you could contaminate it. Well, one semester, one of my students did not even put her lid over it and breathed on her culture. And she had Staph aureus. So she contaminated her culture with Staph aureus. You have this one little spot on her plate that's beta hemolytic. And it's one little spot, so we know it's a contaminant, right? It was not her organism. But she had one little spot of beta hemolysis on her blood agar plate. And I was like, you breathed on your plate, didn't you? And she's like, what? I was like, did you have your lid over your plate? And she's like, what? You know, I was like, I know you did. I have proof right here. And you have Staph aureus, right? But it's okay, right? Sometimes it's part of the learning experience. It was actually a great plate for me, right? I show that picture all the time, every semester now, right? That you can see that contamination. You can see how important it is that you don't breathe on your cultures, right? Because you could be a source of bacteria. So, as always with all infections, right, our best prevention is hand washing, because again, you're going to get it on your hands from your own body, right? And the things that you touch can be infected. So sources, though, it's difficult to identify precisely, right? Because Staph aureus is pretty much everywhere, right? So where did it come from, right, can be very difficult. Prevention, we obviously want to avoid any situation where it's going to promote the growth. There are anti-staphylococcal creams and soaps that can be used to decrease carrier states. Furuncles and carbuncles usually have to be surgically drained. These are pretty serious tissue skin infections. And then the problem, as I said, a lot of them are resistant to penicillin-like drugs. So we have to use alternative drugs. Rocky Mountain spotted fever is named after the fact that it was discovered in the Rocky Mountains, right? Which are right here in the United States. But this is the map of the number of reported cases in 2006 and where they were located. Are they in the Rocky Mountains? No. So don't be fooled by the name, right? Even though it's called Rocky Mountain spotted fever, it does not mean the only place you can get it is in the Rocky Mountains. This is, like Lyme disease, a tick-borne bacterial infection. And so other areas of the United States do have the ticks, do have the wild animal population that are harboring this bacteria, and it can be transmitted to humans. So it's actually more prominent in other parts of the United States now than it is in the Rocky Mountain region. But the reason why it was named that is because that's where it was discovered. Same thing with Lyme disease. It was discovered in Lyme, Connecticut. Although the unfortunate thing for New England, that is where it is predominantly found. Right? So for Lyme disease, the bacteria is quite unique. It has a unique characteristic that most bacteria don't have. So I just said it. How's it transmitted to humans? Ticks. Where in the United States is it most prevalent? Yeah, where's Connecticut? This New England area. Right? We'll look at a map, help you guys out. What factors may contribute to the spread of Lyme disease to other areas of the U.S.? So we've actually seen this spread quite a bit. And so we'll look at the map for that. This guy is a microaerophilic spirochete. So this one corkscrews through its environment, and because of that, and it's Borrelia burgdorferi, we mentioned that earlier, it typically causes a characteristic rash sometimes called a bullseye rash, because where it's injected by the tick, it swims out 360 degrees from that wound, that entry point. When it does that, the immune system is going to respond, you're going to get inflammation, right? So typically it's a circular rounds of inflammation, so it almost looks like a bullseye, right? Concentrical circles around it. The unique thing about this organism and how it differs a lot from other prokaryotes, the genome, right, the DNA, is linear. So they have chromosomes almost like our own. Where most bacteria, their chromosome is circular. And it has numerous copies rather than just one, which is very odd. It's a very interesting bacteria. So we already said transmitted by a tick. And then it's going to spread out. I should probably put a bullseye picture in there. But it was discovered in Lyme, Connecticut, which is right here below Massachusetts. That's where it gets its name. It's highly prevalent in the New England area, but as you can see, it's spreading downward, right, and even out in other parts of the country. There's another large congregation in the Michigan area. So it's tick-borne, right? which means that the ticks are infected. Where did the ticks get the infection from? Wild animals, right, that harbor the bacterial infection. So why is it that this is spreading? People travel.
Outdoor activity, fitness, craze.
Okay, more outdoor activity.
We're starting to habitate more areas.
Yeah, we're stealing their habitat, y'all. Right? This is why nature's preserves are important even to our own health, right? Because we give the wild animal population their space, right, for them to exist. As we encroach upon their habitat and we push them out, we push them and their disease someplace else, right? That's why it's spreading. Our encroachment into their areas and our closer contact, right? So although I like to believe that our nation has become more fitness driven, that would be great. And maybe that's true, but really it is that there are more of us spreading into more and more contact with wild animals, right? Notice Louisiana, woo, right? No cases in 2009. It's very rare. Most of the people who, if it gets reported in Louisiana, it's because they traveled someplace else, right? So they picked it up somewhere else and brought it back with them. And that can be a problem too, because most doctors here in Louisiana aren't used to dealing with Lyme disease. So I had a student a while ago. She was originally from the Northeast like myself. I grew up in Massachusetts. And back there we even vaccinate our dogs against it, right? Because it's so prevalent. Went to college with a girl that had the infection when she was younger. And it can cause, even though it's a bacterial infection, we can give you antibiotics. If it's not caught early enough, in some of the debilitation that it can cause, the inflammation and joint damage that it can cause is a lifelong ailment that you have to deal with. But she had gone somewhere, this student had gone somewhere and came back, and she recognized the wound, the bullseye. She was fortunate enough that she had a wound where she had the bullseye rash. And she told her mom, and she's like, "You have Lyme disease," you know. And she's like, "Yeah, I know." So she had to go to her doctor and tell her doctor, "I have Lyme disease. I need antibiotics." And to confirm it, they had to send it to Tulane's tropical medicine facility here in New Orleans, because no one else was equipped to do that kind of testing to confirm that was in fact what she had. She's like, "It felt so weird. I'm in the United States. You know, it's not a tropical disease." Right? But they were the only ones that were equipped to deal with something out of the ordinary at that time frame. So, yeah, it's really important that if you travel to, right, that you know the diseases of the areas that you travel to, right? One of my professors at Southeastern, he had traveled to South America, and he got leishmaniasis. And it's another insect borne. I think it's some type of fly or something that transmits it. And he recognized the symptoms, and of course he went to the doctor and said, "I think I have this," and then they confirmed it, and we're like, okay. But again, and of course the minute he told his doctor, "Well, I traveled to such and such country where, you know, this disease exists," you know, that type of information is really important. And we don't always remember that, right? Especially where you have infections that take a while to progress. But you should always, you know what is in the areas of where you're traveling to and what you should avoid. And usually if you travel outside of the country, right, there are certain vaccines that you should get, like yellow fever and preventative medicine for malaria. Connor, can you get the door for me? I had a chance to go to Africa when I was an undergraduate. And I didn't go because I was taking a pathology class right before we had sign-ups. And I learned about the tsetse fly disease, African sleeping sickness. And I was too scared. I 100% regret that now. Be knowledgeable, right? You can avoid these types of infections. Don't go on pretty awesome trip because you're afraid of getting a disease, right? And some of these are treatable, right? Or definitely very much preventable, right? But I got scared. That happens to some of us, right? So, don't let it happen to you. Go. Just know what you need to avoid and what you need to do to prevent and help yourself avoid infection. So the next we're going to look at is viral diseases. And so Eric is our new resident expert, right, on chickenpox and shingles. So at the Science Expo on Friday, which thank you guys again, he played the chickenpox game with some of the kids that came by. So it's a little game to educate people about chickenpox and shingles. So we'll talk about that. Most of us are aware of chickenpox and the reactivation of that virus known as shingles. We'll talk about measles, German measles, rubella, fifth disease, erythema infectiosa, roseola, which has several other names too that it goes by, and then good old warts, which are caused by numerous papilloma viruses. So viruses that cause childhood rashes most likely number in the hundreds. In the early 1900s, the cause of these rashes weren't generally known, right? They didn't know what was causing all these rashes. So they had this practice of numbering them. So number one, the most common that they dealt with at that time, we now know as rubiola or measles. Number two is scarlet fever, and the reason why I have that one highlighted, because that one actually is not a viral infection. Anyone know what it is? It's caused by a toxin, right, of a bacteria. And for some reason, I'm blanking on the bacteria right now. I want to say it's the one that causes strep throat. Don't quote me on it. The important thing on that is that it's not a viral infection. The third most common was rubella, also commonly referred to as German measles. The fourth was Duke's disease, thought to be caused by numerous enteroviruses, entero referring to ones that are associated with our gut, our intestines. Fifth disease, right, gets its name because guess what? It was the fifth one on the list, right? Erythema infectiosa. My son actually had this one when he was in, I think, kindergarten. You don't actually know they have the infection until they break out in the rash, and at that point, the infection is no longer contagious. And it clears up on its own. But it can cause serious complications for pregnant women, as will measles, German measles, and chickenpox. Erythema subtium, what's commonly referred to as roseola. Most kids get this when they're very young infants. And again, very common viral infection. Body takes care of it pretty much on its own. The problem is that it usually infects infants, and moms freak out, right? Because they pick up their baby and the baby's like on fire, really hot. And then the next day it'll break out in a rash and it's gone, right? But again, it could be very frightening for a young mom, right, when the baby is spiking this pretty high fever. But it has a very characteristic rash too. And again, usually no problems. So for chickenpox, right? How many of you guys have had chickenpox? Let me put it this way. How many of you have not had chickenpox? Have you been vaccinated against chickenpox? Good, 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 good. So this infection, right, most of us, how many of you guys went to a chickenpox party? I guess I'm the only one that's of that age bracket, right? So when I was a kid, your mom purposely took you to some little kid's house in the neighborhood who had chickenpox to get the infection before you went to school. So I got it when I was 4 years old. I still remember it. I apparently played really well, and I don't know exactly. Some parties, they actually would literally let kids share lollipops so that they would definitely get infected with it. It's transmitted respiratorily when you have chickenpox, when you have the virus in the chickenpox phase. So I got it from a chickenpox party. My little sister went to my mom said she went to numerous chickenpox parties, but I don't know how aggressive they were about trying to get the kids to interact and spread the infection from one to another. She must have been a very clean player, I don't know. She never got it when she was a kid. She got it in high school and missed 2 weeks of school. And again, that's one of the main reasons why parents would do like what my parent did when you were younger, was to get you exposed before you went to school so you would not miss school. And the problem too is as we age, for some reason we don't handle it as well, that primary infection of chickenpox. And for pregnant women, it's even more scary because it can cross the placenta and infect the baby. Right? So they definitely, if you haven't had chickenpox when you're pregnant, they want you to avoid it, right? And they're not going to vaccinate you until later. The good news is that when I was a kid, there was no vaccine, right? So parents had to rely on other people's kids to get your kid infected, right, before school age. Now, in 1995, the FDA approved the chickenpox vaccine. So since then, most people, like my son, will never experience chickenpox infection, right, because they'll be vaccinated against it. Does that mean you won't get the infection? No, you could still get the infection. But it has definitely decreased the amount of people out there with it that would even transmit it, right, since we have so many vaccinated individuals against it. The problem with chickenpox is that your immune system gets the infection under control. And when the first time you get it, it spreads to the skin, right? And so you get these very characteristic pox, right? And these are infectious as they're blistering, and you're respiratorily infectious when you have chickenpox. Once your immune system gets it under control, right, and the pox go away, it hides where? In your sensory neural ganglion associated with the spine. So the unfortunate thing with that is when it reactivates, it's in those sensory nerves. So it hurts like hell from what I've been told. And this is also why sometimes a lot of times you see it on the back of an individual, right? Because it has to do with where it originated. But a lot of times too, like people will get it across the chest, even across the face can happen. And this is a reactivation of that virus. So what causes it to reactivate? Why is it multiplying again and busting out of our cells? Who keeps it under control most of the time? What system of our body says, no, 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 you must stay where you are? Your immune system. So who do you usually see with these types of infections? When do you have to worry about this? When do they suggest maybe you get the chickenpox booster called the shingles vaccine? It's just a booster, right? It's the same virus, right? And they're just giving it to you different concentration, right? So to kind of tell your immune system, hey, remember this guy is on board. Don't forget about him. Keep up on it. Anyone know when they suggest? Come on, no one watches TV? They haven't been playing those commercials in a while. They suggest in your 60s. Because what happens to your immune system as you age? It wanes, right? It's not as strong as it used to be. And it's been a long time, right? In my case, I had chickenpox when I was 4. When I'm 60, my immune system probably won't remember so much about that guy, right? It might need a little reminder to keep this guy in check. So other factors will affect your immune system. Stress is a major problem for your immune system, right? It debilitates it. Other infections. People who are going through chemotherapy, right? My ex-mother-in-law, unfortunately, when she was going through breast cancer chemotherapy, had reactivation of chickenpox, had shingles. And she was really worried because I was pregnant at the time, right? And she was like, "You can't come over. I have shingles right now. You know, I've had chickenpox, don't worry," right? And shingles is not respiratorily transmitted, right? Only the wounds themselves are contagious to individuals who, of course, have not had chickenpox before. Make sense? So, it is in the herpes family of viruses, right? So, herpes viruses, once infected, always infected. These viruses hide inside your body. Okay? So, when a couple of the professors here at Delgado had chickenpox once, shingles, reactivation of chickenpox, we walked around saying they had herpes. Because they do, right? Right? And again, why did they end up with it, right? You know, their immune system became compromised, right? And they were stressed. All right. So we'll pick up here next time, and I already posted the next one for you. Test is still Tuesday no matter whether we get through it or not, right? Most of this stuff is pretty self-explanatory. Yep, Tuesday the 19th. Wound, skin, and respiratory. Just the stuff in our objectives, right? Not everything in the chapters, right? We're not going over all the diseases.